Okay, we're live now. Okay. All right. I'll start off with the introduction of what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about a particular muscle that is called the pec minor. And we're going to split this live into what it is, so its anatomy. We're going to look at its function, its insertion points, where it is in the body. And then secondly, we're going to go over why it's relevant to shoulder pain, why it might not be relevant to shoulder pain, mainly talking about what we call scapular dyskinesia, which is basically a fancy word of saying that your shoulder blade moves badly. And also how that's related to sports and function with sports, as well as just your day-to-day population as well. We're going to then talk about, okay, what does the research say? Why does this muscle matter? Why doesn't it matter? We're going to talk about the importance of looking at muscle length as well as functional adaptation. So the changes to this muscle within a specific population. And then finally, we're going to go about, okay, what can we do for relief? I'm mainly talking about, whether stretching works or not, and what other things you can be doing to help with your shoulder pain if this isn't something that concerns you. Okay, so let's talk about the main point, which is the first point, which is the anatomy. So the pec minor originates from the third and fifth rib, and this is on both sides. Where it will be is sort of in this region here is where it will originate into a little bit more central. And then it goes up and inserts into what's called the coracoid process of your shoulder blade. So your shoulder blade comes around, there's a bony little prominence, it comes around into the anterior, the front side of the shoulder. And that's where the second part of that muscle attaches to. So basically it goes from here to here. Its main functions are stabilization of the shoulder blade, alongside depression, which means to lower it down, abduction, which is bringing it away from the body, and protraction, which means pushing the shoulder blade forward, as well as internal rotation and downward rotation, so tilting down of the scapula of the shoulder blade. So it has a lot of functions, and so what that could mean is, it's highly relevant to the shoulder pain. It's said to, because it's part of that complex. So there's a general belief that there's a link between shoulder pain and shortness and the length of the pec minor. Since the attachment is where I said, you would think there's a direct link between the two, but studies have actually found that there is no link between increased risk of a shoulder pain and dyskinesis when looking at the same population that have a shortened muscle compared to a longer muscle. And so if the length of the muscle, if we're talking about the length specifically, if that doesn't matter based on research, then why is it relevant to shoulder pain? So we know that with sport, that length of muscle often reduces over time. So if you were to take the hamstrings, for example, in runners, in sprinters, they require a shortened length for power and speed. So therefore, the problem is not the length, but mainly the adaptation that occurs. So this can be the case of an office worker, or let's say you go to the gym a lot and you do a lot of bench pressing, which is something that the reason why we're talking about this live is something that is actually relevant to a few of my clients, that they feel like a pinch in the front of the shoulder, and also they are what we call hyperkyphotic, where they sit on the computer or at the laptop at the desk, and their shoulder blades are rounded forward, and in these populations this muscle can be a problem because not because the length is shortened, and that's not the problem. It's more the fatigue and stiffness that occurs as a result of that, of the consistent contraction of that muscle. So this leads into a term that we talk about quite a lot as therapists, which is compensation. And compensation is the main issue, not the length. And that is the reason why you could be getting shoulder pain as a result of the pec minor. Not its length, but because it's stiff. So let's take an example for a sporting population. So if you look at cricket players and you measured the length before and after a game, you would definitely see that there is shortening of the pec minor compared to someone who wasn't playing the game. But not everyone who plays cricket has shoulder pain, right? You have a higher risk of it, but that's mainly because of what's going on a little bit further away in the glenohumeral joint, which is the actual shoulder girdle itself. This muscle's a little bit further away, so it's not going to be the number one problem. It might be contributing, but it's not the number one problem. So it's not about the length, but it's easily restorable by making sure that you are doing enough stretching afterwards, as well as making sure that you are doing the other work, so the functional work afterwards and in between, in training and in between games. But the problem is when you do not restore the length. When you don't restore the length, what happens is the problem of the stiffness and the tightness in the muscle can ensue. Now, there's some research that suggests in traumatic populations where there is a lot of heavy load on that joint, or you have had multiple injuries of that joint, the shoulder, and as well as the around this area of your upper chest, that there are problems with what we call fibrosis, which is thickening and irritation, inflammation of the tendons. But that's in a very rare case, right? It's not in, there's only a couple of studies that are done. So what we're looking at here is why would the pec minor be relevant in general? But what we realize is that it's mainly a result of constant contraction that we see there's a problem with shoulder pain. And it's not directly a cause. It's you probably you should probably think of it as the victim as opposed to the problem, right? It's the pec minor is a muscle that can be often contracted and tight following an issue that's happening elsewhere. So if we're thinking about what issues that happen elsewhere, you need to think about what's happening at the back of the shoulder. So if someone is rounded, if someone is doing a lot and overusing that muscle quite a lot, the problem is that the backside is easily fatigued, weak, and not doing its job properly in terms of functional movements. And that's where we see what we need to focus on. And that brings me on to the last sort of point, which is what can be done for relief. So when we think about muscle relief, the consensus is if you do repeated stretching as part of your routine, there is no positive effect on scapular mechanics. And pain relief, if you get pain relief as a result of that, it's only temporary. So but we just said, you just mentioned stretching. To do stretching after the game would be, a cricket game would be beneficial. But no, it doesn't have an effect on the mechanics, and the pain relief is only temporary. The main thing that you need to do is work on, as I mentioned, the muscles elsewhere. So there was one study that looked at a patient with anterior shoulder pain, so front side shoulder pain over 4 weeks, and stretching was said to help. When they stretched every day, it helped with the pain, but this pain was only short-lived. It only lasted about a week, and then after stretching, it started to. After the stretching was done, the pain started to come back. So what does this mean? We know, based on the literature, that stretching alone as an intervention is not enough for long-term relief. So maybe asking what does work. So I've had clients recently that are recently dealing with shoulder pain in the same populations as I mentioned previously. So the office workers, the bench pressers, weightlifters that focus on bench pressing. And what we find is that this pectoral muscle is weak, and you might do a little bit of soft tissue to help relieve that. And there were some studies to suggest that there are some interventions that can be done to help relieve the tension in the muscle. But what we do know that works better is to focus on the poor shoulder blade mechanics that come alongside that, and that the pec minor tightness is the one of the symptoms, not the cause. So what we need to look at is strengthening the rotator cuff alongside upper back mobility. These two things are very important. If you have better upper back mobility and mobility of both shoulder girdles overall, muscles aren't going to be shortened or tight as a result of it, and not having to overwork and overtrain. And then the rotator cuff, which is the 5 muscles, 4 main ones that are associated with movements on rotations of the shoulder, as well as other abduction, bringing your arm overhead. This needs to be strengthened through a long, not too long, but a period of weeks that work on progressions and building muscle that way. So, why is this important? As mentioned previously, adaptations usually occur as a result of fatigue and stiffness. Therefore, by working on opposing muscles, which in this case are the rotator cuff, that can improve the pain over time and prevent reoccurrence. I've only really focused on stretching of the pecs at the end of a session that have included in working the shoulder, quite vigorously to make sure that you aren't, contributing further to that muscle being overworked. So stretching alone is never a prescription that I would give. You always have to work on strengthening the opposing muscle. So to summarize, I have a few clients that will be interested in this live, especially, and what I would summarize by saying is that the pain that you may be getting in the shoulder, this pec minor will be a contributing factor, but is not the main problem. At the same time as well, it's not your shortness of that muscle that's the issue. It is what's going on elsewhere that you need to focus on, mainly the other muscles that are all attached to the shoulder blade, not just this one. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Hopefully you learned something about this particular muscle and how important it is to look at the shoulder girdle as a whole in relieving the shoulder pain.